welcome to our webinar today, Mobile Learning That Works. My name is Matt Plass. I'm the Chief Learning Officer with Interactive Services, and I'm supported today by John O'Brien, who runs our marketing function. A little bit of housekeeping just to begin. The session will be approximately 45 minutes. With a number of people on the phone, we tend to keep the phone lines muted, but we would welcome your questions. So if you do have a question, please use the chat facility. You can either send it to the group, or if you'd like it to remain anonymous, send it directly to John O'Brien. And we'll either hit the questions as we go through, if I spot them. Otherwise, we can round up at the end and we can take a look at them together. You'll notice that we've also put some polling questions into this webinar. They're really just to get a temperature check on where our organizations are with mobile learning. They're not essential to the content today, but if you would like to use them, it could help us as we go through the presentation today. And the first one that's up here is really a very general impression of whether you feel mobile learning is impacting positively on your organization. Okay, for anyone who hasn't met us before, Interactive Services design and develop training solutions. We've been around since 1993. We have offices in California, New York, the UK and Ireland, and we develop primarily e-learning but also classroom-based and mobile learning solutions. We complete approximately 200 projects every year, and we work with 30 of the world's Fortune 500 companies. Our value proposition is based very much around creative and innovative instructional design, and often that will meet technology in the e-learning space, and particularly in the mobile space as well. And one of the things we'll talk about today is the journey we've been on, and I'm sure some of you have been on through mobile learning development, the mistakes we've made, some of the victories that we've had, some of the different technologies we've tried and instructional design strategies we've tried with various clients. I'll also be able to show you a short demo a little further into the webinar of adaptive and responsive content that we've put together. So the agenda for today, there's really three things to look at. One is to return to the idea of mobile learning as a hot topic. As far as I'm aware, it's been a hot topic for about 6 years, so I don't know when it's not going to be a hot topic. But it feels now more than ever that all organizations are finally pushing through with their mobile strategy. Increasingly, organizations have a bring your own device policy, which is supported by their IT infrastructure, and learning, if it hasn't been leading the way, is certainly catching up in most organizations that we work with. Of all the solutions we'll talk about today, the responsive design, adaptive responsive HTML, you may have come across that, you may not. We feel that's the way forward, certainly for the next year or so in mobile design. So I wanted to focus on that specifically in the middle of the presentation. And finally, we'll have a look at how mobile is being used in the workplace, and we'll show you 4 or 5 examples of different types of mobile learning that we've done with our clients. And as I say, as we move through the presentation, if you do have any questions, throw them into the chat window, and if we don't spot them at the time, we'll come back to them. So there's another polling question up right now. It says, does your organization have a coherent and workable strategy for mobile learning? Yes, no, don't know. Okay, so interestingly, 50% say no. They don't think the organization has a coherent and workable strategy. 30% say yes, it does, and 10% don't know. In fact, the numbers are changing all the time. It's now 64% who say no. Very interesting. I mean, I think this reflects what we've been seeing among our client organizations, and it's been our experience internally as well to some extent. There's been an interesting journey through learning how to develop for mobile, not just in training, but how to position content onto mobile devices in other areas of the business. And one of the pitfalls that we've seen some of our clients fall down is throwing everything at mobile, and we've learned that it isn't right for everything, particularly the smartphone. The small handset is not a great device for taking long training courses on. And we did see a few examples in the early days where organizations would attempt to transfer a 60-minute or a 90-minute e-learning course onto a mobile phone, and that experience is often very unpleasant. So we've learned it's not right for everything. We've learned that there is still a considerable nervousness in the market around which standard and which technology and which instructional design strategy to follow. Nobody wants to equip their entire workforce with the Betamax of mobile learning. People are very nervous to back the wrong horse. Increasingly, we see iPad uptake is increasing, but will the iPad still be the device of choice in 2 years' time? I don't think anyone can answer that. If they can, I think there's some money to be made there for them. So there's still a nervousness in the marketplace. And we've also learned, and many organizations have learned, that you have to use your mobile content in a very tactical way. You can't pack everything into the mobile device. People will engage with it for short periods of time. They'll engage with it at specific moments, just in time and just in place. And really, you need to be thinking about those moments, those very small moments for mobile. If you pack everything into it, it becomes unusable. It becomes like the suitcase that won't shut. So our journey through mobile, I would imagine, reflects some of yours. We were a Flash development house purely and simply 3 or 4 years ago. We did some work in Lectora and HTML because some of our clients like to work in HTML and be able to update themselves. But our best work was always done in Flash, we felt. With the iPad and Apple products in general, well, of course, they don't play Flash. So when mobile came along, we started looking at different ways to deliver this content. And of course, all the tablets have different screen sizes. We built some HTML5 templates. They're fantastic, but of course, HTML5 won't work very well in IE9 or below. So most organizations we work with, their IT infrastructure is IE9 or below. So the wonderful HTML5 templates that we've built to work on the iPad don't work very well on the desktop. We've built some content as apps, but as anyone who's built or tried to deliver content as apps knows, it can be an expensive business, but it can also be a very tricky business to actually get the content onto the device. And the big issue is this one in the top here. You often end up with 2 builds, one for your desktop, one for your mobile device. And 2 builds, high cost, high risk, it just doesn't fly. So where did we end up? Well, we ended up dipping our toe in the water with various clients in many different ways, and that's what we're going to share today. But I think before we do, it's worth reminding ourselves quite how important this is right now. Some of the statistics we'll see here, they just illustrate the fact that mobile is here whether we like it or not. It's pervasive, and increasingly people expect to be able to bring their own device into work and have it supported by the IT infrastructure, and also be able to access content and training on it. So we know that we have this always-on culture. What does that mean? Well, it means it's happening. We can join them. We can't beat them. It's over. We see some statistics here around mobile phone ownership, and I think smartphone ownership is the important one here. More than 1/3 of US adults own smartphones. That number is going to increase. It's increasingly the tool of choice to access the internet and to access content, so we need to be abreast of that. Mobile is becoming the tool of choice for information search. So we can either package our content for mobile, in which case it will be searched, or we can lag behind and become the second choice. We know that people use mobile devices differently in the home and in the workplace, but actually if we look at this split between enterprise and personal, we see that roughly 75 to 80% is web browsing, 60 to 75 is email, and then the real split is the working remotely for enterprise and then the gaming for the personal use. And what can we learn from this? Well, we learned that the tablet connects the home and the workplace. I don't know about you, I have a laptop for work. I rarely turn it on in the evenings unless I plan to do some work. But my iPad, which I also carry around at work, is the tool I use in the evening. It's what I use during the day to access email. It's what I use in the evening to pull up a recipe or to make contact with somebody. So tablets particularly, but also other mobile devices do connect the home and the workplace. We see that mobile learning is increasing, mobile learning for enterprise, but in many cases, businesses are not optimized for mobile phones and for support. We do think businesses are preparing for mobile, perhaps not fast enough, and if the business is taking its time to prepare, then the learning function is going to struggle to get ahead. Now, it's interesting if we look at the market share for the operating systems. We hear so much about mobile being the new exciting thing, the hot topic. I said it myself just earlier. But interestingly, 35% of us still use Windows 7, 42% of us still use Windows XP. We're talking about desktops and laptops here. So the world isn't quite ready to switch to mobile. We are still in a position where if we want to deliver content to mobile, we still have to think about how we deliver that content to the desktop and the laptop. We're not ready to switch over entirely into a mobile delivery. Another interesting fact, if we look at the mobile and tablet operating system market share, there are so many operating systems out there, but in my opinion, we really don't have to plan and develop training for all of them. If you hit the big three, Android, iOS, and Symbian, you're going to reach 70% of users. So I don't think we're quite at the stage yet where we have to be creating content that will run across all platforms. Where does that leave us? I think it leaves us at this point here, the jackpot, what we're aiming for. It's the ability to develop content once and have it run on as many platforms as we need it to run on. We don't want two builds. We don't want two different technologies. We don't want to have to update two pieces of content every time there's a change. And we don't want the cost or the development effort that's associated with those things. We want to develop once and run it on a PC, on a laptop, on an iPad, on a Samsung Galaxy Tab, an iPhone, an Android phone, and have the same quality experience with each. So now might be a good time to take a look at what we consider to be the main players in the mobile space from the technology perspective. And I think there's a whole instructional design piece around how you use mobile, but the technology piece is what's keeping people up at night at the moment more than anything. So it's worth settling on this for a few minutes. This is a crude representation, to be fair, but I think all of these languages and development tools that we have down the left, they have a good side, they have a bad side, and they have an ugly side, and Flash is up there at the top. It's still probably the most powerful tool out there for developing media-rich, flowing, beautiful animated content. But it's expensive to develop in, it's very processor-heavy, which is why Apple won't support it, and it doesn't work on the majority of mobile devices that people have. We know that we can do a lot with basic HTML. It will run across all platforms, but the interactivity can be limited in terms of what you can develop for mobile content. And it's hard to control. It's hard to test on different platforms. We found this ourselves. With Flash, we had a framework, and you can work in one screen in a piece of content and be fairly sure that the rest of the framework and the other screens won't be affected. If you're working in basic HTML, if you make a change, really you need to test the whole thing again. So testing and development becomes a more tricky subject. We all know about apps. We all use apps on our mobile devices. Apps are great. They sit on the device. They're fast. They're responsive. But they're hard to roll out. They're hard to get onto people's devices. The security issues around them are tricky for many organizations. And you need a different version for each platform. The Apple app won't work on the Android phone. HTML5 could be the language of the future. It can rival Flash for the rich output. But supported features vary on the different browsers, and it won't work on the older browsers. An articulate storyline, great way to publish desktop and iPad content, but again, fairly limited interactivity and very set screen sizes. This is why we probably think that the bottom one here, the responsive HTML, is the way forward in the short term. If you haven't come across responsive HTML, you develop once and you can deploy across multiple platforms. I won't say it can't, but it's very difficult to rival Flash for the rich output. And there is a large testing overhead, but it's still a very powerful tool. So we're going to have a look at some responsive adaptive design. And we'll start off with another polling question. In this case, does your organization currently have a bring your own device policy? I'll just give people a moment to answer that. Okay, so an interesting split there. I think for anyone who does think that they are going to have a bring your own device policy in their organization, the adaptive and responsive HTML content is very interesting because it does give us that develop once, run onto multiple platforms. So what are we talking about when we talk about responsive design? Well, it's HTML. It's an emerging HTML standard. You will probably have seen it in web design. It's been around in web design for a while, and it allows you to develop an HTML page that will resize and reformat itself depending on the screen size that it's being run on. Responsive content responds to its environment. So I'll show you an example in a moment, but if you imagine a website, when you minimize the website and you squish it down into a tall, narrow window, the content moves around for you. This is something that web design has done for a while, learning has not. We've started to move into this space in terms of building e-learning courses that use responsive content, and we've been able to develop and deliver them out to multiple platforms. So we'll have a look at an example of this now, and hopefully this is displaying on your screen. We're looking at a prototype of an online course using responsive HTML. You'll see that we have a menu along the top. We have a series of questions which I can click on to answer. And we have a button to move forward and a button to move backwards. Now the interesting thing here is if I squish this screen across, you see that it starts to reformat. I go from having 2 rows of 4 to having 4 rows of 2. You also notice that in the wider view, we have the menu running from left to right. When I squash this down, the menu disappears and it hides itself under a button. So what we're looking at now is pretty much what this would display as if you ran it on your iPhone. If you ran it on a desktop, it would automatically respond to that desktop screen and it would know it should display itself approximately in this way. So we're able to package questions, interactions, video, all the stuff you'd see in a typical e-learning course. Here's another great example. We have 3 pieces of content, 3 images and associated text. And when I squish this down, it's going to reformat it. Instead of left to right, it's now top to bottom, and much more suitable for a phone. I'll leave you the link to this prototype at the end of the call. You'll be able to have a play with it. If you take a look on an iPad, you'll also notice that if you flip the iPad from vertical to horizontal, the content will flip with it, and it will resize accordingly. And we have some questions in here. Interestingly, again, when we squish this down, we see that the text for the options will wrap to meet the new size. So what we're talking about is one build, and during that build, the templates that we use are optimized for the 5 or 6 devices that we know we need to hit. We put the code in that tells the templates to respond in a certain way when they meet a certain device. But after that, it's a single build, a single delivery, and all importantly, when we have to make updates, we update that main content once and we republish once, and every device can read the new content. So it's exciting stuff. Okay, this is just a slide that outlines perhaps 5 of the key platforms and screen sizes that you would optimize that responsive HTML to meet. So we're going to move on now and have a quick look at some other ways that we've used mobile with some of our client organizations. Hopefully so far you've had a good snapshot of what the technology landscape is and the increasing importance of having a mobile capability. What I'll do now is share a few slides that describe mobile projects that we've run with our clients, the different technologies we use and the different outputs that came from them. Before I do, we'll have another polling question. So really we're just going to ask, how has mobile been deployed in your organization? I'm sure it's been used for things that are not on this list, but I'd be interested to see what the split is in terms of the way you've used mobile in your organization. Okay, so 33% or 50% actually customer-facing. That's interesting. We have a customer-facing example. 43% just-in-time support, and then a smaller amount teaching new concepts, quizzes and assessments. And I'd say that that's an unsurprising result. I think one of the things that mobile is perhaps not so suited to is presenting completely new information. That's not to say it can't, but where its real strength lies is in that just-in-time support, and perhaps in providing quizzes, assessments, booster shots that will provide an update on a piece of learning that someone has already taken. And the customer-facing piece is fascinating as well. More and more organizations are using learning and games as a marketing tool to reach their customers, and mobile is perfect for that, of course. Thank you. Okay, so how is mobile learning being used in the workplace? Well, this is an interesting quote considering how recent it is. Even though some large organizations have started using mobile technology to empower their workforce, for most the question still remains, how do we actually use it in the workplace? Well, here are some examples. This is a piece of work we did for one of our clients, Walmart. The business need was to provide training to people who worked in the store, assistant managers. They wanted to negate the need to use up vital floor space with a computer. They also didn't want people to have to go back of store to take the training or to find out the just-in-time resources that they needed. The solution was a training program that was delivered on a Motorola Zoom tablet. It was built in HTML. It presented the learner with a floor plan of a Walmart store, so whichever area of the store they happened to be in, they could tap to go through into the content. The content provided them with standard operating procedures, videos, quizzes to help them check their understanding, and the all-important what does good look like piece, so they could take a look at an area of the store, very quickly identify if there was an issue that needed to be solved, and then pull up through their tablet some of the resources, top tips, expert opinions that would help them to resolve that issue with their team. Very successful. Managers and associates have just-in-time, just-in-place learning at their fingertips. It's an interesting solution because it was developed in HTML specifically for the Motorola Zoom. If you run it on a different tablet, it works kinda. You can see it, you can navigate through it, but it doesn't look quite right. So we learned from that experience that with that particular solution we put together, we would have to re-optimize it for every single device. Now, luckily, they only needed it for the Motorola Zoom. It wouldn't work if they suddenly said we need to have this on the iPad as well. Here's an example of a customer-facing piece. We put this together for AXA Insurance. It was one of a couple of programs, and these were delivered as apps for the iPhone. You can run them on the iPad too, although they expand a little. They're really optimized for the iPhone. This was to promote awareness of dangers in the home. It's a cross between a learning module and a game. It's a piece of marketing, essentially. And as a customer, you can enter this family's home, you can look in their different rooms, and you can identify the dangers they're in. So you might see a knife that's been left out on the chopping board, or a kettle with the cable a little too close to the floor, or an oven that's been left on, or a pan that's about to boil over. It's a great value add to the customers. It's fun, short, and it shows that AXA are engaging with the issues in their lives. It plays on the web, and it also plays on mobile devices, including iPad and Android tablets. So really, when you start pushing stuff out to the customer, you have to make some assumptions about the devices they're going to use to access the content, but the worst thing you can do is disappoint the customer. So we did have to make that a nice wide spread so that people would be able to see it on their devices. What we're looking at now is an example of some courseware we developed first in Flash. This is for Pfizer Animal Health. The courseware is designed for veterinary surgeons, people who have qualified as vets and who are now conducting their continuous education every year. It's a pay-per-view site. You can download training modules or training courses that come in a series of different modules. It's very media rich. We used Flash specifically when we began this project 2 years ago because we wanted the very richest animation and content. We then realized that we had to deliver it to iPad and iPad only as part of the offering. So we redesigned the courseware in HTML5. It was an uphill slog to get it to work. It does work. It's wonderful. But, as we mentioned earlier, because it's HTML5, it isn't backwards compatible onto most people's desktops. So with this example, we're actually running and supporting two different versions, a Flash version and an HTML5 version. And in fact, right now, we're looking at potentially migrating this into a different technology because we've ended up with two platforms to support, which isn't ideal. But it is a good example of what you can do with HTML5. If you put enough effort into it, you can replicate almost everything that Flash can do. And it's very successful. This solution is HTML-based. It was built in Lectora. It was designed for very low bandwidths. It's been built to run on a PC and an iPad. It's to reach associates in corporate headquarters, but also on-site at airports and other locations, so people who are moving around an airport and perhaps going into areas that don't have great connectivity. The content's very engaging. Because it's built in basic HTML, you take a little bit of a hit on the interactivity, but not on the visuals and not on the instructional design. So the experience is great, but the interactions are perhaps not so fluid and the animation's not so smooth as you would see in Flash or HTML5. It's very engaging, it's interactive, and what it lacks in the Flash, it makes up for in portability, and it's very, very efficient as well. The last solution we'll show is a learning center. So this is a combination of an app and streamed content. It's a player, essentially, that sits on your device. This is designed to sit on the iPad. And then within the player, we can stream content down. The advantage of this is that the Learning Center app sits on the device and can be run offline. So if you've streamed content down to it, you can then look at that content on the plane or on the subway. Every time you reconnect, it will alert you to any updates, just as any app would, and it will automatically pull down those updates into the content. So it plays learning content. It can also be used to facilitate classroom sessions, and it really shows that the organisation is ahead of the curve. It's equipping people with a self-updating learning centre, which new content can be pushed down to. And it's probably too small for you to see here, but on the interface, they can also access latest company news and other bits and pieces. So it starts to become a hub that they would access at least once a day to find out what's going on and to see what's new. Okay, so something else which we'll leave you the link for and you may want to take a look at. We gave this presentation at Maisie, or a version of it, towards the end of last year. And around that time, we put together a short piece of HTML content which we called 5 Things We Learned About Mobile Learning. The link's up there if you'd like to write that down. It works, I think, best on the iPad. I think you can see it on the desktop, but it isn't optimized for desktop. It's really for iPad delivery. And it allows you to go in and just find out what we learned about these 5 key areas. So we've learned about mobile being just-in-place training, about the difference between the app and the browser in terms of development costs, but also in terms of user experience. Defining what we mean by tablet. Do we think tablets are being used as a big smartphone or a small laptop? Do I use my iPad or receive content on my iPad the same way I will with a laptop? What's the amount of time I could comfortably sit with an iPad and absorb content compared to a smartphone? It looks a little bit about where mobile sits in as part of the training brand. I mean, this presentation isn't focusing so much on instructional design. I think that's another webinar to be had in the future. But we've done a little bit of thinking about where mobile sits as part of the blend. And finally, the warning: prepare for integration issues. Whatever you're doing, whichever of these solutions you're attempting to implement, we're still, and all organizations, and particularly learning management systems, are in the early days of integration. And we're still coming across the roadblocks and the issues that we need to get over. Okay, so I wanted to leave a little bit of space for questions. Hopefully you would have sent a few through to John or to me, and I can just have a look in a moment and see if they're there. We're going to do one last polling question. This is the second time we've run the webinar. Thank you so much for joining. It's fantastic to see there are 13 people on the line. That's wonderful. We would really like to know which bits of this webinar you found useful and which bits were perhaps less relevant to you. So if you could identify as many or as few of these topics we discussed today that you felt were relevant and useful to you, that would be very helpful. Thank you.